Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to snarkymoviereviews.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is the Western Testosterone Fest with a grouping of some of the manliest men of all times, the Magnificent Seven, 1960. The plot is very simple. 7 down on their luck American gunfighters go south to protect a Mexican village from bandits. The movie is a Western adaptation of the Akira Kurosawa masterpiece 7 Samurais, 1954. On to the actors. Today we have a lot of veterans. Yul Brynner played super cool gunfighter Chris Larrabee Adams. Brynner was covered in episode 68, The Buccaneer, 1958. Charles Bronson was cast as gunfighter Bernardo O'Reilly, half Mexican, half Irish. Bronson was covered in episode 17, Hard Times, 1975. Horst Buchholz played Chico, a would-be gunfighter. Buchholz was covered in episode 84, 123, 1961. Brad Dexter played gunfighter Harry Luck. Dexter was covered in episode 38, 99 River Street, 1953. James Coburn played gunfighter Britt. Coburn was covered in episode 17, Hard Times, 1975. Whit Bissell had a small role as Chamley, the Undertaker. Bissell was covered in episode 30, Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962. Bing Russell had a bit part as Robert. Russell was covered in episode 12, Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Valentin de Vargas played one of Calavera's henchmen, Santos. Vargas was first discussed in episode 35, Blackboard Jungle, 1955, as one of the students. He is better known for playing a punk in Touch of Evil, 1958. Steve McQueen played the role of super cool gunfighter Vin Tanner. Terrence Steve McQueen was born in 1930 in Indiana. This king of cool had a crazy youth. Possibly due to his mother's drinking, he was sent to live with his grandparents at his uncle's farm in Missouri. He moved back in with his mother, but conflicts with his new stepfather forced him onto the streets, where he engaged in petty crimes. He was returned to the farm. At the age of 12, he went to L.A. to live with his mother and new stepfather. He was quickly in conflict with this stepfather. He was sent back to the farm. At 14, he left the farm to join a circus, but eventually went back to L.A. and his mother. He continued his street activities and was eventually locked up in the California Junior Boys Republic in Chino. He was released at the age of 16. His mother was now in Greenwich Village and he went there. It was not long before he took a job on a ship as a merchant marine. He jumped ship in the Dominican Republic and became a towel boy in a brothel. Whatever the heck that means. He made his way back to Texas where he worked odd jobs such as oil worker and lumberjack. Finally, he spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. McQueen used his GI Bill to study acting. He worked on the stage, including Broadway, and raced motorcycles for extra money. At the age of 25, he left for Hollywood. He began getting a few bit parts before he landed the lead in a series, Wanted Dead or Alive, 1958-61, where he played a bounty hunter. His first leading role was in a low-grade sci-fi film that is a lot of fun. The movie was The Blob, 1958. Next, he appeared in The Great St. Louis Bank Robbery, 1959. He received a role that was meant for Sammy Davis Jr. Sinatra liked McQueen and gave him a lot of face time in Never So Few, 1959. McQueen followed this with a film that is at the top of the man pantheon, or Mantheon, if you will. This movie is the star-packed The Magnificent Seven, 1960. He and Yul Brynner were so cool I can barely stand it. McQueen made 2 World War II dramas, Hell is for Heroes, 1962, and then The War Lovers, 1962. This was followed by another Mantheon film with the star jam-packed World War II POW tale, The Great Escape, 1963, that is loosely based on a true story. McQueen made a few more films, but they were not particularly big hits. He did a great job as a gambler in The Cincinnati Kid, 1965, which also had an ensemble cast. He made another Western with Nevada Smith, 1966, before he made another minor Mantheon film as a loner sailor in The Sand Pebble, 1966. He was a little out of place in The Thomas Crown Affair, 1968, and then he sent a fourth film to the Pantheon. Is that a double-double? The fourth film was Bullitt, 1968, where McQueen played a detective racing a charged-up Mustang around San Francisco. Riding this wave, McQueen played a Southerner in The Reivers, 1969, and then made a racing film, Le Mans, 1971, about a 24-hour race in France. You know, that's a lot of round and round. He teamed up with director Sam Peckinpah in a contemporary western, Junior Bonner, 1972, and The Getaway, 1972. McQueen was amazing again in Papillon, 1973, playing a prisoner sentenced to life on Devil's Island with co-star Dustin Hoffman. McQueen took part in the 1970s disaster craze when he played the fire chief in The Towering Inferno, 1974. McQueen took 4 years off from films before returning in 1978. His last two films were the western Tom Horn, 1980, and a bounty hunter film titled The Hunter, 1980. He was already getting sick and was diagnosed with mesothelioma in late 1979. McQueen traveled to Mexico and engaged in experimental cancer treatments. Sadly, he died in November 1980 at the really young age of 50. Eli Wallach played the leader of the bandits, Calvera. Wallach was born in 1915 in Brooklyn, New York.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Wallach graduated from the University of Texas, but was trained for acting at the Actors Studio and the Neighborhood Playhouse. He made his Broadway debut in 1945. Wallach's debut film was Baby Doll, 1956. In the lineup 1958, he played a sharply dressed hitman. However, his big break came as Calvera in The Magnificent Seven, 1960. He held his own with Clark Gable, Marilyn Monroe, Montgomery Clift, and Thelma Ritter in the amazing John Huston-directed The Misfits, 1961. Other great movies include How the West Was Won, 1962, The Victors, 1963, Moon Spinners, 1964, Lord Jim, 1965, and the rom-com How to Steal a Million, 1966. Wallach hit it big again when he was given the role of Tuco in the last of director Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogies, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. He continued through the 1960s and 70s with films like McKenna's Gold, 1969, Cinderella Liberty, 1973, Crazy Joe, 1974, The Deep, 1977, and The Hunter, 1980 with Steve McQueen. In the 80s, he started getting gangster roles like Tough Guys, 1986, The Two Jakes, 1990, and the candy-crazy Don Altabello in The Godfather Part 3, 1990. He played a rabbi in Keeping the Faith, 2000, a quick-talking liquor store owner in Mystic River, 2003, and a businessman in Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, 2010. Wallach died in 2014 at the age of 98. He had been married to his wife for 66 years. Robert Vaughn played Gunfighter Lee. Vaughn was born in New York City in 1932.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
He headed out to California where he began studying drama and eventually got a PhD in communications. In 1955, he started doing small television roles and uncredited parts in films. He began getting credited roles in 1957, but I'm more interested in Teenage Caveman 1958, where he played the cymbal maker's teenage son. Vaughn really got noticed for The Young Philadelphians 1959, for which he received an Oscar nomination. The next year, of course, he was in The Magnificent Seven 1960. He worked more in television than in film, and eventually was cast as Napoleon Solo in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. 1964-68. Following the amazing success of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Vaughn began working more in film. He teamed with McQueen for Bullitt 1968. Other movies include The Bridge at Remagen 1969 and The Mind of Mr. Soames 1970, but he jumped back to television, this time in England. After half a decade, he returned to America and again worked mostly in television. His films during this period include S.O.B. 1981, Superman 3 1983, The Delta Force 1986, and Black Moon Rising 1986. He continued to make movies until his death in 2016 from leukemia. Vladimir Sokolov played the old man of the village, the patriarch. He was born in the Soviet Union in 1889. At his death, this actor and director had 117 television and film credits. Sokolov began his education at the University of Moscow, but left to join the Moscow Academy of Dramatic Arts. He worked as a director and assistant director for a decade before moving to Berlin in 1923. He worked there for another decade or so until those damn Nazis started messing stuff up. He moved to Paris and then to the U.S. in 1937. He was given mostly ethnic roles, and his most famous are For Whom the Bell Tolls, 1943, Scarlet Street, 1945, and The Magnificent Seven, 1960. Sokolov died in 1962 as a result of a stroke. Rosinda Monteros played the role of Petra, love interest of one of the seven. Although she has a small biography, I've included her because she is basically the only female with speaking lines in this movie. Monteros was born in Mexico in 1935. She is only credited with 3 films: The Magnificent Seven, 1960, Nazarin, 1959, and as best I can make out, The Net and the Man from Murcia, 1965. Story. This movie begins in a small Mexican village not a great distance from the U.S. border. A group of about 30 banditos, led by Calvera, Eli Wallach, and his second-in-command, Santos, Valentin de Vargas, ride into the town. They steal everything that is not tied down, leaving the poor villagers with little to survive on. One of the villagers can no longer stand it and runs for Calvera with a machete. The man is shot down before he gets anywhere near the group. Calvera vows that he will return as the men leave the town. The villagers gather in the local cantina and debate their choices, from do nothing, to hide food, to God forbid, fight back. 3 of the bravest villagers, Hilario, Jorge Martinez de Hoyos, Sotero, Rico Alonza, and Tomas Pepe Hearn, go to the village elder, or old man of the village, Vladimir Sokolov. He advises them to go to the U.S. to buy guns because they are plentiful there. Boy, he wasn't kidding about that. The 3 men gather all the wealth of the village and head north. When they get to the cowboy-filled Texas town, maybe Arizona, they are stared at and don't seem welcome. There's a hearse parked in the street, the horse-drawn kind. The undertaker, Whit Bissell, is trying to return money to 2 traveling salesmen played by Bing Russell and Val Avery. The men had paid for a funeral for a man that had been lying dead in the street for 2 hours. However, the undertaker cannot bury him in Boot Hill because he is an Indian. When the men ask how long this has been going on, they are told it has been since the town got civilized. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, 2 men volunteer to drive the hearse to the top of the hill. The first, clad in black, with a shaved head, is Chris, Yul Brynner. The other is a drifter named Vin, Steve McQueen, that has a really laid-back style. As they drive the wagon up the hill, they receive shouts. There is a young cowboy following them up the hill, but he waves the 2 men off to show that he is no danger. And finally, someone shoots at them from a window. Vin wheels around and takes him out with a shotgun.
Second story window. Curtain moved.
I'm not in a good position. Let him stick his neck out. You elected?
No. I got nominated real good.
At the top of the hill, 6 men are waiting to stop the pair. Chris easily wounds 2 of the men, and everyone decides they will let the burial happen. Back in town, Chris and Vin are greeted with cheers and drinks. But the 2 gunmen have no real prospects, as the West is becoming tame. That night, the 3 Mexicans come to Chris's room. They tell of their plight and ask him to help them buy guns. Chris recommends that they hire men because these days men are cheaper than guns. The 4 of them go to the local saloon to look for talent. Vin doesn't want to take the job because the pay is only $20 for 6 weeks. Vin goes to the craps table and loses his entire stake on an opening roll. Chris invites him over for a drink. Vin tells everybody that he is going to be a store clerk, and one of the villagers says it's good, honest work.
Got anything lined up?
Yeah. take a job in a grocery store. Fella says I'm gonna make a crackerjack clerk. Crackerjack. I wouldn't even pay for my bullets. Ours is a poor village.
We understand. You could get much more in a grocery store, and it's good, steady work.
This commits Vin to the gunfighter job. Chris is still not committed to taking the job, but this was the first time a client offered him everything they had. Later in the evening, the young man that followed them up the hill comes in and wants to join the group, whom he now idolizes. Chris treats Chico, Horst Buchholz, poorly and humiliates him while he is testing him to work with the group. One of Chris's friends, Harry Luck, Brad Dexter, a top gunfighter, wants to join the mission because he thinks there is gold or some other great reward. Although Chris tells Hank this is not the case, Hank insists on coming along. Later, they recruit Bernardo O'Reilly, Charles Bronson, who is so poor he now chops firewood to earn his meals. One night, waiting in Chris's room, is Lee, Robert Vaughn. Lee is on the run for a murder or two and has completely lost his nerve as a fighter. The final selected member of the group was Britt, James Coburn, a man so good with a knife and a gun he can only challenge himself. The 3 villagers and the 6 hired guns ride south towards the village. Off in the distance, Chico follows like an outcast dog. Some days later, Chico catches fish with his hands, showing he is fast enough to be a gunfighter. He shares the catch with the others and is admitted to the group. When they arrive in the village, all of the people hide from the gunfighters. In a rage, Chico rings the alarm bell in the church, bringing the town running. The next day, the professional gunmen begin training the villagers, building walls, and traps. The villagers have a festival, and some very nice Yaqui Indian masks are used, spatially placing the village in the northern Chihuahuan desert. A boy runs in and lets the gunmen know that 3 of Calvera's men are scouting above the village. 2 men go after them, and Chico follows along. Because Chico spoiled the ambush, they have to kill all 3 instead of bringing back a captive.
That rock?
No, the man you're gonna kill. Bueno.
If only we had more guns. Think what we could do.
You'll get more guns.
How?
Same way you got these. Calvera's man.
The ones who spied on us brought them.
Like 3 kings burying gifts.
During this time, the gunmen are being well fed by the villagers. They find out that most people have no food, and then they start sharing their meals with the children. Lee is still having problems and suffers from nightmares. One day, while out scouting, Chico discovers a girl, Petra, Rosenda Monteros. The villagers have hidden all of the eligible females away from the gunmen. Chris orders them all brought in so they can be protected. As the day of the attack draws nearer, they try to bring the old man of the village inside of the protected ring, but he refuses and stays in his house.
They are all farmers. Farmers talk of nothing but fertilizer and women. I've never shared their enthusiasm for fertilizer. As for women, I became indifferent when I was 83.
Finally, Calvera and his men ride into town. They are met by the gunmen and the villagers. Calvera says he should have known when his scouts didn't return. When Calvera mentions the walls, Chris says they were built to keep him in, not to keep him out.
I should have guessed. When my men didn't come back, I should have guessed. How many of you did they hire?
Enough.
New wall.
There are lots of new walls. All around.
They won't keep me out.
They're built to keep you in.
A real melee breaks out and about 10 of Calvera's 30 men are killed. Everyone, including the villagers, performed well except for Lee, who hides against a wall. Everyone in the village is ecstatic and proud of the fighting they have done. 3 little boys come to Bernardo and say they will bring flowers to his grave if he is killed. They idolize the man and follow him everywhere.
We had a meeting and we drew straws and we got you.
You got me. What do you mean you got me?
If you get killed, we take the life and avenge you. And we see to it that there's always fresh flowers in your grave.
It's a mighty big comfort.
I told you he'll appreciate that.
Well, now, don't you kids be too disappointed if your plans don't work out.
We won't. If you stay alive, we'll be just as happy. Maybe even happier. Maybe.
They now believe Calvera will leave and plunder an easier target. Since Chico is Mexican, he puts on a sombrero and moseys into Calvera's camp. He finds out that they are starving and must attack the village again. When he tells the people of the village, they lose faith and want to surrender, even though Chris has made it clear from the beginning that once it was begun, it would have to be finished. Chris decides to take the professional gunmen and make a night attack on Calvera's camp. When they get there, the camp is deserted. Chris and company head back to the village. When they get there, they are surprised by Calvera and his men. Fearful villagers, after locking up Hilario and Thomas, have allowed Calvera to enter the town. Calvera disarms the professionals, but he doesn't want to kill them, fearing U.S. reprisals.
Anyway, I don't want to kill you.
Why so generous?
Practical. We hear about it up north. Maybe some friends of yours make more trouble for me. A man who never wants no trouble.
Calvera says he once robbed a bank in Texas, and they sent a whole army after him. He said he learned then that only Texans can rob banks in Texas.
Once I rob a bank in Texas, your government get after me with a whole army. Whole army. One little bank. It's clear the meaning? In Texas, only Texans can rob banks.
This, of course, is an allusion to Pancho Villa. Chris and the men are escorted out of town, and after some distance they are given their weapons back and sent on their way. All the men, except Hank, decide to return to the village and fight. Even Lee now has his courage restored. When the gunmen return to the village, another battle breaks out. Vin is shot in the leg. Bernardo is killed protecting the boys and tells them to respect their fathers as he dies. The villagers join the fight. Lee, after fighting well, is gunned down. Britt is also killed. Calvera gets a drop on Chris, but Hank rides in and saves him before he is killed. Hank asks Chris what the prize was. Chris tells him $500,000 in gold, and then Hank dies. Chris has shot Calvera, and before he dies, he tries to figure out why the gunman came back, asking, "You came back to a place like this, why? A man like you, why?" The next day, the three gunmen help bury the dead. The old man of the village invites him to stay and then bids them farewell when they refuse.
You won't be sorry to see us go either.
Yes. The fighting is over. Your work is done. Only the farmers have won.
He states, "You're like the wind, blowing over the land and passing on. Vio con Dios, go with God." Chico decides to stay with Petra and returns to small village life. Chris and Vin ride past the graves, and Chris says, "The old man was right. Only the farmers won. We lost. We always lose." The boys put flowers on the graves of Bernardo. World famous short summary: Buddy trip turns out bad. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I'm on just about all of the social medias, but Twitter is my main place. You can find the links in the show notes. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All that I ask is that you jump over to iTunes and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.